than on the left-hand side, that rather, well, a bit of a grey, depressing site, a bit of a wet, low-key site, if you like, a rather depressing site at Balmoral, the wet roads leading into the estate itself. And we know, of course, what lies beyond the road. We know what lies at the end of that path. It is the castle, and it is the Queen being kept comfortable, being monitored 24/7 by an expert medical team. And all we can do is clearly wish the Queen well. We do that automatically and sincerely, but we are waiting too, I think it's fair to say, for further news from the medical team at Buckingham Palace and at Balmoral about the Queen's condition. And Nicholas Witchell is with me, our royal correspondent, who of course has been talking to us all afternoon about the events of this day. And this is the time of day, Nick, when lots of people will be maybe returning from work, they'll be joining us, they'll be aware of the reports, but they won't have seen lots of it. And I think that we're in a position where we're waiting, and we're right to be waiting without any rush and without any haste at all, waiting for the next update, if you like, now that we know the royal family has gathered there.
Yes, and of course Buckingham Palace has not been in the habit of giving updates, but I think on this occasion there will have to be something, given the level of concern that there is not just here but around the world. And we've seen the other members of the royal family arriving at Balmoral. That in itself is an indication, I think, of just how serious the situation is. So the mood, I think, is fairly described as sombre. The concern is considerable. So many politicians have talked about profound concern, and one must imagine that the Prime Minister and others are aware, have been appraised on Privy Council terms with whatever is the absolute situation. So we await any further news from Buckingham Palace, though I have to say that at the moment there is no indication that there is any further statement to be made. Looking, you made much of the images of the Queen on the balcony during the Jubilee celebrations remarkable, really, just 3 months ago. And when she appeared in that bright green coat, that was on the final day of the Jubilee celebrations on that Sunday. And it had been thought that perhaps she wouldn't make the journey from Windsor, but I think the Prince of Wales encouraged her to do so, and of course she did. And of course the crowds were absolutely delighted to see her. And I think she was terribly touched when they sang the national anthem. And yes, there was, I think, a sense that, something is drawing gradually to a close here. And I think that everybody was very touched on that occasion. That balcony that actually she first appeared on in 1927, when she was 1 year old. She was brought and shown to the crowd by her proud parents. The Duke of York, as he was then, her father and mother. So, yes, remarkable, really, and that is what monarchy is all about, the continuity, the span of years.
Yes.
The balcony, everything changes but nothing changes, and that is why it is this source of reassurance which so many people, so many millions of people find very comforting. So we must just continue to hope for the best, that there is some encouraging news, but at the same time I think, given all the circumstances, we have to accept that we just have to wait and see.
Yes, we do indeed, Nick, thank you. Let's go from Balmoral then to Downing Street. Let's join Chris Mason, our political editor, who's joining us from there. Chris, do you have any update for us on what Downing Street's understanding of events is?
What I can tell you, Hugh, is that the Prime Minister is working as normal behind me in Downing Street. There are no plans for her to return to Scotland, to Balmoral. Of course, as we've been reflecting, she was there just a couple of days ago to become Prime Minister in that last public moment where we saw the Queen as the Prime Minister before Liz Truss. Boris Johnson had resigned shortly followed by Liz Truss. We did hear from the Prime Minister at lunchtime shortly after the statement from Buckingham Palace in which Liz Truss said the whole country will be deeply concerned by the news from Buckingham Palace, and adding my thoughts and those of people across our United Kingdom are with Her Majesty the Queen and her family at this time. And here at Westminster, like I suspect in every corner of the UK, and indeed in many places around the world, a profound...
Chris, I apologise. I hate interrupting you, but I'm afraid we've got a dreadful problem on the mic. I suppose it's the elements interfering. It's the rain getting into cables and all kinds of things. So if we clear that up, Chris, I'll be back with you as soon as we can. Chris Mason there, our political editor. By the way, the US President Joe Biden has told Prime Minister Liz Truss that he and his wife Jill are thinking of the Queen amid deep concerns over the monarch's health. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said this. His, that's to say, the President and the First Lady's thoughts are solidly and squarely with the Queen today and with her family. The President has been briefed this morning and will be updated throughout the day concerning news out of the United Kingdom. So that's President Biden. I suppose, Nick, you know, we can expect, we've had quite a bit already, but from the person who's the other side of the special relationship, you'd expect an expression of sincere concern. And given all the visits that the Queen has made to the States, and indeed how many state visits for presidents she hosted in Downing Street over the years, well, that's one expression of concern that you would expect straight away.
Yep, and I think once again, it is quite normal for US presidents to be very keen to meet the Queen. They met at the G7 summit down in Cornwall, however many months ago that was. And of course, the Queen has met every US president bar one. She never met Lyndon Johnson, but I think Biden is the 14th US president. We're on to the 15th Prime Minister, 14th president, and I think there have been 6 or is it 7 popes that she's met, and which just again gives you a flavour of this remarkable life that she has led, meeting so many significant figures in world history, beginning, you know, just after the war as a young princess, when her father was ailing and she was having to step in and assist him as a councillor of state. So, you know, she has met just about anybody who is anybody, and yet she has never shared to the world any of her thoughts or appraisals of any of them. No. She has kept it all within either herself or within her family, and she has understood the fundamentals of the position that she has occupied for these 70 years, that she must be an uncontroversial figure, and she has absolutely understood the principles of a constitutional monarch. She learnt them really from her father, and she has continued in the manner, in the style of her father, rather understated. And it was for that reason, of course, that she found the Duke of Edinburgh such a useful ally, because there was the difference in personality, difference in approach. And I think she owed so much to him, as we sensed in some of the things that she has said about him since his death.
It's interesting, owing, yes, of course, to Philip, but one senses as well that because of the abdication in 36, and then the fact that the course of her life changed, that her father really did take on the role of a very diligent tutor. And as I said earlier, Nick, you know, I read somewhere when one of the royal household commented and said, look, you know, in many ways you have to look at the reign of Elizabeth II as a continuation of the reign of George VI. And when you think about it in those terms, it makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. In style, they are so similar. And the Queen revered and loved her father deeply. She knew what a struggle it was for George VI to be the monarch during the difficult times of the Second World War. It was a huge strain. He was helped through it, of course, by the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, but also by his elder and I'm sure younger daughter, but they were a very close unit. And there is no doubt that the Queen learnt an awful lot from her father, rather in the same way as she has attempted to pass what she has learnt, not perhaps so much to Prince Charles, but to Prince William. And I think the Queen has taken a great deal of time to, as it were, tutor and pass on her wisdom and her approach and the principles that have governed her approach to monarchy
Yeah.
to Prince William. And I think I interviewed him some years ago, and I asked him, whose template do you tend to follow? Is that the one of your father and or the one of your grandmother? And rather to my surprise, he answered and said, well, I think my grandmother has got it absolutely right. And, in many ways, Prince William once said about being monarch, it's about setting an example, doing one's duty. It's about using your position for the good. It's about serving the country. Now, those, goodness me, those are the principles that encapsulate the approach that Queen Elizabeth has brought to the monarchy, to the British monarchy.
Nick, thank you. We're going to just bring in a guest, to the royal biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, it's good to have you with us, and we're grateful for your expert perspective on this as well today. As we follow the reports, and clearly we're reflecting on the deep concern that people have at this point, and the family have gathered there in Balmoral. What are your reflections at this stage?
Well, I think I feel very much what everybody is feeling. Obviously, this is a very poignant moment, and none of us quite know what's going to happen, but because the entire family, well, the entire nucleus of the family are gathered at Balmoral, and the fact that the Queen hasn't been sent to hospital speaks volumes. They obviously just want to keep her comfortable, have her family around her, and we just have to literally wait for news, whether it be good or bad. There's nothing more we can do. That is the situation, and it's very sad, especially as as you've said many times this afternoon, as we saw the Queen with Liz Truss. To only 48 hours ago, 2 days ago on Tuesday, and she looked so happy and in good spirits. I know she looked frail, but if you have mobility problems, you're going to have muscle loss, and so she's going to look frail. But it was really wonderful to see her, and it sort of gave us all hope. Well, there she will, she'll be carrying on. But whatever has happened between now and then, we don't know. But all we can do is just hope very much for the best.
Indeed. I know that everyone watching will be sharing that, Ingrid, certainly. It's been a remarkable year, hasn't it, really, because we've reported several times on the issues that have surrounded the Queen's health, the fact that she's not been able to undertake some engagements. And yet, when we think back to the Jubilee, which at one point we were very concerned about in terms of the Queen's ability to be present, we had 2 balcony appearances. We had a great sense of fun and celebration around the birthday parade to open events. The year has been one of some extremes, really, hasn't it? And as you say, it is just a matter of 48 hours ago since the Queen was obviously determined to fulfil her constitutional duty and invite Liz Truss to form a government. So it speaks volumes, really, about Her Majesty's commitment to the job.
It certainly does, and she hates letting people down, and she's always really, really wanted to get on with the job. So I think she's had a mentally probably quite a hard time. But I think this all started in October 21, when she was meant to be going to Ireland, and suddenly, the journalists and everyone were waiting for her, and suddenly she had to cancel. That was the beginning of her mobility problems, and I think it must have been difficult for her to have to say, well, take doctor's orders, which she always does, saying, I can't do this. And so that has been a recurring theme of her life ever since then. And I think, wonderful though she is and cheerful though she is, I think it must have been very difficult for her and very frustrating to feel that she's unable to carry out the duties which she's carried out all her life, which is another reason, I think, why Buckingham Palace have delayed it till the sort of 99th hour always to let us know whether or not the Queen is able to do certain things. I think it's because she was so determined to try and do them, but in the end couldn't. So it's been a difficult time for her.
Well, we'd like to think that we'll get a good progress report, Ingrid, but we must wait and see. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ingrid Seward there, of Editor-in-Chief of Majesty magazine. If you're just joining us here on BBC News, This is our extended coverage today, following that bulletin from the Queen's medical team at lunchtime that her doctors are now very concerned about the state of her health. She's at Balmoral, her estate in Aberdeenshire. That is where she's being cared for. She's said to be in a comfortable condition. The doctors are there with her. She's having full 24/7 medical supervision, and in the last couple of hours the family has been gathering, and we've seen the children turning up, the rest of them, because Prince Charles was there already, and Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and now they've been joined by the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, and indeed by the Duke of Cambridge, her grandson, who's also arrived in the last hour or so. They landed at Aberdeen Airport about an hour and a half ago. So they're all there, and the Queen, who's been engaged in lots of duties in recent months and has been showing great spirit and great strength and a determination to really fulfil all those items in the diary. Well, today we had the news that she's not able to do that now. She's in a position where her health is causing a lot more concern. She's been made to feel comfortable, we're told. There's no mention of any hospital treatment or any other intervention elsewhere. All the care is being done at Balmoral. So, following that statement, which was at 12:30 today, which is over 5 hours ago, there's been no word. All we've seen is the gathering of the close family members at Balmoral Castle itself. We are waiting to see if there'll be another statement. We don't know. But there may be a statement, and that is why we're staying on air as we approach 6 o'clock. And my colleague, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is keeping a very, very close eye on these events, as you would imagine. And Nick, I've just summarised there where we are right now, but there'll be lots of people watching, wondering if it is realistic to expect some kind of statement now that the children have gathered, and maybe that they've had some kind of briefing from the doctors. So that's not an unreasonable thing to ask.
Well, I would have thought that that is absolutely what will need to happen. I think Buckingham Palace will have to say something, because there is such widespread and deep concern now, and the family has arrived at Balmoral, as you say, and therefore it would be logical for them to issue something, whether it is just a bulletin in terms of briefing us as to the state of her health, whether there has been an improvement, or whatever is the situation, because I think that as we approach the early evening now, it will be necessary for Buckingham Palace to say something. But I stress that I have not seen any indication that that is the case. That is just us sort of thinking that it would be logical and sensible and necessary.
Well, necessary because, of course, you know, there's no way to kind of overstate this. The affection for the Queen, the respect for the Queen, people's sense of loyalty to the Queen is such that it will be exercising people's minds.
Well, yes. You know, in all of our minds is the unimaginable, almost, isn't it, really? And when that moment comes, and we have no reason to suppose that it is imminent, but people will find it an almost seismic moment, a seismic scale of shock when that moment comes. And I'm not in any way suggesting that it is about to come, but we are, let's be just candid about it. We've seen the facts as they have emerged today. We have seen the family gathering. They haven't rushed up to Balmoral without very good reason. And one must suppose that whatever it is that they have now been briefed about, Buckingham Palace will feel the need to share that with the rest of the nation and indeed the Commonwealth at some point this evening.
One imagines, because as you said earlier, Nick, we're talking about a family. It's the royal family, and we're dealing here with Her Majesty the Queen, but it's family, and it's a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother whose health we are talking about. And I imagine that they have gathered with her to offer comfort.
Yep, one must assume that. And it is only, what, I can't do it in my head, 20 months, is it, or since the Duke of Edinburgh's death,
Yes.
rather less than that.
Yes.
So, this is a family which has suffered one death quite recently, and which is now having to deal with the illness and the declining health, as we understand it at the moment, of, as you say, their mother or their grandmother. It is perfectly possible that she will recover from this, or not perhaps recover, but that she will get over whatever issue it is that has caused the doctors to speak in the way that they have. So we must again stress that we don't know what the true situation is. We are merely anticipating and expecting that the palace will feel it necessary to say something. But, as you say, Hugh, at the heart of this is a family which is providing comfort to the Queen, and one must hope that that is the situation that is taking place within Balmoral Castle at the moment.
Nick, thank you. Well, the time is a minute past 6 o'clock. And if you're joining us here on BBC News, we are reporting the latest on the state of the Queen's health, because Her Majesty is under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle after doctors became concerned for her health. A statement from Buckingham Palace released earlier this afternoon said that the Queen, who's 96, was placed under supervision after further evaluation, they said, but they then went on to say she remains comfortable. Now, the BBC understands that all 4 of the Queen's children are now at the royal estate in Aberdeenshire. 4 senior royals arrived at Balmoral in the past hour. The Land Rover being driven by the Duke of Cambridge. Alongside him was Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and then the Earl and Countess of Wessex also with them. We are told that Prince Harry is also on his way, but he wasn't travelling with this party, and he's not travelling either with his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She's not travelling to Balmoral. There's been lots of reaction, as you'd imagine, lots of expressions of alarm during the day. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying that the whole country would be deeply concerned by the news, and she said that her thoughts and those of everyone in the UK were currently with Her Majesty and with members of the royal family. Let's just remind ourselves, just 2 days ago, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was officially asked by the Queen to form a government. Liz Truss became the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign when she visited the Queen there at Balmoral. So that is a summary of where we stand right now at 3 minutes past 6, and our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me, and Nick and I are keeping a very close eye on all the developments, watching the comings and goings there at Balmoral too. What would you say to viewers at this point, Nick?
I would say that I think once again, in the absence of any hard facts, that the images, I think, are now starting to tell the story. I was looking closely at that picture that we just showed of the Wessexes in the back of that vehicle. It's the first time we've seen the close-up of Prince Edward, or the Earl of Wessex, and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I thought they looked very sombre. I thought, in particular, she looks very sombre.
Yeah.
I think people... Every individual must look at that photograph and draw their own conclusions. I'm not going to assist anybody in attempting to draw any conclusion, but I think she looks, sombre.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
I think, they're arriving there at the gates of Balmoral Castle after dashing up from London, from their home at Bagshot, having been presumably summoned at some point this morning and briefed about whatever it is that has occurred at Balmoral Castle, and the family has come together and they have got on a RAF plane and they have flown straight to Aberdeen and then straight out to Balmoral. This against the background of the Queen's doctors having become concerned about her health. So that is the situation. We have heard the statements from senior politicians who will have been briefed on Privy Council terms. Current and previous Prime Ministers will know what the situation is. And I think, again, we just read into their statements a general sense of profound concern.
Well, that statement, Nick, of course, came from Buckingham Palace, and these are the images of the palace where there have been some crowds gathering during the course of the afternoon, because, of course, the news has been getting around and people have been at the railings there, just waiting to see if there's any announcement, waiting to see if there's any news of the Queen's health. And some of those, of course, will be visitors to London. Others will be people who live in London or indeed are visiting London from other parts of the UK and beyond. How unusual, Nick, was the statement that was released by Buckingham Palace earlier today?
Extremely. They have made a point of not saying anything. As we've been discussing this afternoon, they insist that the Queen is entitled to patient confidentiality. They will not engage in a commentary about her health. So after telling us back in October, on October the 20th, that she was cancelling that visit to Northern Ireland and she had been advised by her doctors to rest, their statements have been few and far between. We have had briefings, if one can call them that the episodic mobility issues have from time to time reared their head and have prevented her from attending some of these major state events, the state opening of Parliament and so on and so forth. But they have not gone beyond that. They have not addressed the suspicion, and it's been a pretty widespread suspicion, that there has been some underlying condition in addition to the mobility problem. So for them to come out, having said last night that she was unable to chair the virtual Privy Council meeting, that it was necessary and that she was tired after the events with the incoming Prime Minister, that she was needing to rest last night, then this morning to hear the statement from Buckingham Palace. Yes, I think we can all quite reasonably and justifiably say that clearly something has happened that is giving rise to all of this concern.
With that, let's go to Downing Street then and talk to our political editor, Chris Mason. And Chris, we've already seen the image of the Queen smiling just 2 days ago, looking frail but smiling as she greeted Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. What's going on in Downing Street today? The Prime Minister working there and obviously being fully informed about events at Balmoral.
That's right, Hugh, yeah. So Liz Truss is working from Downing Street this evening. There are no plans for her to travel to Scotland, to Balmoral. As we've been reporting in the last few hours, several members of the wider royal family have been making that journey. It is, of course, as you say, just a couple of days ago that Liz Truss was there and was greeted by the Queen, had that audience with the Queen in which she was invited to form a government and to become Prime Minister, just a matter of moments before the Queen had had a final audience as Prime Minister with Boris Johnson, in which he tendered his resignation. And it was that reminder of the key role that the Queen plays right at the heart of the British political system, detached from democracy and yet somehow overseeing it and performing these central roles of state when governments come and governments go. And that announcement last night that she wasn't able to take part in that virtual meeting of the Privy Council, that's a gathering of senior ministers who meet in her presence regularly, an indication of her frailty. In the last few months there have been those signs, haven't there, of her increasing age. So, for instance, the audiences that Prime Ministers have with the Queen and hugely cherish, when you read the memoirs of Prime Ministers, they hugely cherish that opportunity they have, that discreet opportunity for a chat in private with the Queen, weighted and freighted as she is with all of the experience that she has meeting heads of state and government over decade after decade after decade. Traditionally, and for many years, they would happen in person at Buckingham Palace. In recent years, not least because of the pandemic, but continuing those audiences happening remotely, again to account for those episodic mobility problems as reported by the palace in recent months and years, and an acknowledgement of her increasing frailty and age. And even in the last 48 hours, a reminder here at Westminster of the role of the Queen in the formation of a government. Not just that moment that we so widely reported the other day, and Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, but also the appointment of ministers. When ministers are formally appointed, they are done so formally by the Queen. They are ministers of the Crown. So plenty here at Westminster, reflecting very profoundly and reflecting that profound concern that exists around the country and in many places around the world about the Queen's health this evening, so conscious as they are of that bind that exists constitutionally between Parliament, government and the royal household, the monarch personified for so long by the Queen.
Indeed, Chris, and it is one of those moments, and let's hope we get good news from Balmoral, but it's one of those moments when people do reflect on the kind of constitutional arrangement that exists and which the Queen has made work. She's really helped to oil the wheels of that constitutional arrangement, which lots of constitutional experts say, is not a normal arrangement. It's not an arrangement which on paper should be working. But of course this notion of the Crown in Parliament as the constitutional monarchy is framed is one that today we reflect on, because of course there is this axis, the axis of importance and continuity which stretches from the palace to Parliament and to the executive itself.
Yes, and we see this, don't we, when there are those moments, the state opening of Parliament, colloquially described as the Queen's speech, where the Queen comes along. She wasn't able to attend, of course, just a few months ago, but comes along to Parliament and sits there delivering out loud the government's words, saying what the government is planning to do in its legislative programme in the months and years ahead. And there's a particular moment in that ceremony, you may recall this, where the door is slammed in the face of an official called Black Rod, acknowledging the independence of the democratic House of Commons in that constitutional arrangement where the Queen, the head of state, sits at the top of it, Parliament below it. That point about the head of state, a striking one as well, Hugh. I've travelled recently to the G7 summit in Bavaria and on to the NATO Defence Alliance summit in Madrid, and part of the formulation of the language of those events is that they are gatherings of heads of state and government, and that matters because, of course, in the UK system we have a head of government in Liz Truss, the Prime Minister. We have a head of state in Her Majesty the Queen, and that distinction between the two so pivotal to how the UK system operates.
Chris, thank you again. Chris Mason, our political editor there, with the latest for us in Downing Street. Well, from Downing Street, let's go to Windsor, because Windsor, of course, dominated by the great castle, and Windsor, I think it's fair to say, as our understanding goes, is the Queen's favourite residence, though she loves Balmoral as well. But at Windsor, our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has been there for us today. Looks slightly better weather-wise than it was earlier, Helena. What is your sense there of the way that the local community in Windsor, which has such a close bond with the royal family because of the proximity there, what's your sense of what people are saying in Windsor itself?
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And for those who don't know, Windsor Castle is right in the centre of Windsor. Just down the road is the high street full of shops, and local people, residents in Windsor, very much view the Queen as one of their neighbours, as a local resident. In previous years, she was often seen in the Great Park around here. We've spoken to a number of people here on the High Street, some emotional at the news of the Queen's health, and also many people just anxious to hear how she is. We haven't had another update from the palace since the one we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. Lots of visitors coming out of the castle gates here. Some of them told us that they had heard the news from inside the grounds, others emerging not having heard. We know, of course, that the Queen spent much of the last 2.5 years here at the castle. As you mentioned, Hugh, this is perhaps her most favourite royal residence. It's a lot of green space around here. It's somewhere where she loves to be. And she spent the last years of her husband's life, the Duke of Edinburgh, during lockdown. They remained here together, spending day after day together. They celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November 2020. She, of course, made that trip, which is traditional for the Queen, to spend the summer months at Balmoral. She left here at Windsor Castle in July, and the Queen would traditionally return here to the castle in October. But the sense this evening, Hugh, here, the feeling amongst locals and also visitors here, tourists here, there are some who've gathered just a bit down from where we are, is one of concern, deep concern about the Queen, wanting to know how she is, and anxiety. So I think everyone really is waiting for another statement from the palace to find out exactly how Her Majesty is.
Well, we await to see if that statement comes, Eleanor. Thank you very much. Eleanor Wilkinson there with the latest at Windsor. And of course, Windsor is where the Queen spent so much of the lockdown period, much of that with the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in July this year, the Queen decided that she really did want to maintain the tradition of spending lots of the summer at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, in the glorious countryside there. And of course, Balmoral Castle is one of the favourite homes of the Queen, where she's spent so many happy times during her long life, going back to her childhood. And it brings back lots of memories of happy times with her parents and her sister Margaret, and of course with her family when they were young, and then growing up with Prince Philip as well, as they enjoyed the countryside and the picnics and the barbecues around Balmoral. So it's a place of great happiness for the Queen, and that's the reason she decided that she really did, despite her mobility problems and health issues, she wanted to leave Windsor in July and go to Balmoral as usual. And she is, of course, a stickler for tradition. So Buckingham Palace there on the right, very much seen as the office, if you like. That's where the working quarters are. Windsor, not too far away to the west, is really the kind of favourite home, the main home, where lots of work is also done. And then, of course, we have the other residences, Balmoral, which we are familiar with in summer, and then, of course, Sandringham in the east of England, and there are a few others too. Of course, there's Holyrood House in Edinburgh. So we are looking today at news from Balmoral. That's our focus today. It's not Buckingham Palace, really. It's Balmoral, and that is where the Queen is being kept comfortable by the team of doctors who are there, and who have just put that unusual statement out earlier today. Unusual because it was rather forthcoming, saying that they were concerned. They were now concerned about the state of the Queen's health, and that she was comfortable at Balmoral, that some of the family now who've arrived there to see their mother, in the case of Prince Charles and Princess Anne, and Andrew and Edward, and then, of course, a grandson in the form of Duke of Cambridge. They're all there, and we imagine that they've been talking to the doctors there and have had their briefing, and one imagines that they are with the Queen, keeping her company and making sure that she's as comfortable as possible. Now, at Balmoral is my colleague James Cook, who's the BBC's Scotland editor. And James, could you bring us up to date, please, on what's been going on there?
Yes, Hugh. No sense of drama here, no sense of panic, a sense instead of a well-rehearsed plan quietly swinging into action. For most of the afternoon, it was relatively calm here. The rain teemed down, leaving the purple heather around this estate sodden. Every few minutes or so, another photographer, another reporter would cross Isambard Kingdom Brunel's bridge across the River Dee and make their way here to the gates of Balmoral. And then at 5:05, a flurry of flashbulbs as senior members of the royal family swept past us. Prince William driving a Range Rover, Prince Andrew next to him, and in the back Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I could see grim faces. Certainly Andrew, I saw clearly, very grim-faced Andrew as they drove past and into this estate, which of course has been one of the favourite places, if not the favourite place of the Queen for many, many decades of her reign. An estate, a 50,000-acre estate dating back in terms of its association with the royal family to Queen Victoria, the castle here built for her in the 1850s. And of course a place where we know the Queen has many fond memories of spending time with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, not least because the photograph that was released by the family on his death was a photograph of the two of them together in the hills on this estate.
James, just a thought here about the Queen's relationship with Scotland as well, because of course we're at a time where there's been a lot of debate about the future shape of the United Kingdom. The Queen, of course, represents the solid element of continuity, and that's an interesting thing for us to reflect on, given her great affection for Balmoral and indeed for Scotland.
Yes, this is surely a monarch who personifies the union of the crowns of 1603 as much as she does anything else. The constancy that we talk about that applies to her reign actually goes way back before her reign in terms of the royal family's relationship with Scotland, predating the Act of Union, the Union of the Parliaments in 1707. And indeed the Queen has been a constant figure associated with that union of the crowns. Not, it has to be said, Hugh, always without controversy. In the Silver Jubilee speech, which the Queen gave in 1977 at Westminster, when she talked about the benefits union had conferred at a time when the Labour Party was proposing to devolve power to Wales and to Scotland, proposals that were ultimately defeated. That certainly raised eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised in 2014 when the Queen, attending Crathy Kirk, just along from the gates of Balmoral here, talked about people considering the future, thinking very carefully about the future as they decided how to vote in the referendum on independence, which the people of Scotland ultimately rejected. The palace, of course, strongly denied that there was anything wrong with that comment, said it was a perfectly sensible thing to say, to urge people to think very carefully about such a serious issue. And of course there is deep affection for the Queen in parts of Scotland. It is fair to say that if you look at the polling, the monarchy is not as popular north of the border as it is south of the border, but the Queen is certainly more popular than the monarchy in Scotland, and that is certainly reciprocated on her behalf. She's talked of her deep and abiding affection for this nation.
And a thought, James, as well about the place that Balmoral plays in the great royal landscape, if you like. You've mentioned the fact, and we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Queen has a great affection for it, and its heritage goes back to Queen Victoria's time. We're talking about Aberdeenshire, which of course is lots of it, very, very beautiful. The landscape there is magnificent. And as you say, very significant that rather lovely image of the Queen and the Duke, released when the Duke died, was indeed in the hills above Balmoral, on this enormous estate that the Queen has there.
Yes, that's right. And the Queen has been coming here regularly with her family for the summer and into the early autumn, year after year after year. It's very clear that this place is somewhere for which she holds extremely deep affection. We just see another police car going through the gates there of Balmoral Estate. Yes, Hugh, you're right. I mean, there is definitely an affinity. I mean, if you look back through the newsreel footage, back through the years, here she was in the 1960s, buying an ice cream for one of the young princes just along the road in one of the local shops. One of the few places, really, where I'm not saying the Queen routinely walks up and down the streets of Ballater and Braemar, but it would be a place where she would not be troubled by people locally if she were to do so, because people are very used to seeing senior members of the royal family. Indeed, I remember one occasion somebody telling me that just outside these gates here they were driving along and there was a car waiting with its indicator on to turn into the gates, and as they drove past they realised it was none other than Queen Elizabeth at the wheel.
James, thank you very much. James Cook with some nice memories there of the Queen and life in Balmoral. But today we are reflecting on the state of the Queen's health, sadly, and we're just waiting to see whether Buckingham Palace or the officials at Balmoral make another statement, having said at lunchtime that the Queen's doctors are very concerned about the state of the Queen's health, that she is comfortable, that they had no more to say at that point, but they felt it necessary to convey the fear and the anxiety that was being felt. And that is why, of course, we've now seen the Duke of Cambridge, Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex and some others making their way to Balmoral. They've arrived there. The Prince of Wales already there, and the Duchess of Cornwall too. The Princess Royal is there. So the family, the family is gathered, and we're told that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way, but he wasn't with the party that arrived a short while ago. Watching the images with me, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, and Nick James there was underlining the special place that Balmoral holds, because really some people may be wondering why the Queen in September is in Balmoral. Why is she not back in Windsor or even in Buckingham Palace? But it's important to underline that that's normal. That's what she does.
And she, of course, she loves to have the routine, to have the sense of confidence that you get from an unchanging routine. And so much of her year never changes. So, yes, I think the annual trip up to Balmoral is really very important to her. And it is somewhere where she feels very comfortable, very much at ease, somewhere that she has known all her life. So the time is approaching 6:30 now, isn't it? I was struck by what James Cook was saying about the grim faces that he noticed on the faces of the members of the royal family as they drove into Balmoral Castle a short time ago. We are still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern, and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
there is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace, and the area in front of it dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern, but at this stage we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and, of course, that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that, indeed, they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952, on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years, until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries, and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister. The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the Palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the Palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The death of Her Majesty brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 8 decades of immense change. Throughout that time, Her Majesty was the one constant presence in public life, a head of state who personified stability and reassurance. Her life had been dedicated to the service of the people, and her reign was characterised by a steadfast sense of duty. Elizabeth was just 25 when she came to the throne in 1952 on the sudden death of her father, King George VI, as Britain was still recovering from the Second World War. She was sustained by her 73-year marriage to the late Prince Philip, her strength and stay, as she once described him, who was at her side for 3 major Jubilee celebrations. Elizabeth II was the most widely travelled head of state in history, the Queen of 15 nations, head of the Commonwealth of 54 countries and territories. Her Majesty's death brings the second Elizabethan age to a close, and a long and momentous chapter in British life, a reign marked above all else by a sense of service to others, a reign unlike any other in the long history of Britain and the Commonwealth. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is with me as we report the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And one thinks immediately, Nick, first of all, of the loss for the royal family.
One does. This, for the nation, for them, this is an absolutely massive moment. The moment that so many people have dreaded for so long has come. It's a moment of great solemnity and national sadness. It's hard, really, fully to take it in. It's no great surprise, given her age and her declining health. But nonetheless, it is a very considerable shock to feel that she has died. Millions of people, I think, as they learn this news, will feel a sense of personal loss. And I think many people will find it rather disorientating. Let's just understand this moment. It isn't just the death of the longest-lived, longest reigning monarch in British history, a monarch who has been there in the background to our lives for most of us, for all of our lives. It is the end of what I think history will judge to have been one of the most remarkable reigns in the 1,000-plus years of the British monarchy, a reign which will be remembered and talked about in years to come. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and we know, as we've said this afternoon, that not everyone is, she was a monarch who earned the widest possible respect here in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It's the end of the reign of Elizabeth II, a monarch who always put duty first, who brought dignity and decency to the highest office in the land, who embodied the best of qualities, who's been a focus for national unity and identity, and who has been the still, calm centre of stability and reassurance to this nation and the other nations of which she has been head of state for more than 70 years, while so much around her has changed. She has been a distillation of our national identity. She has been constant in an ever-shifting world, constant, steadfast, dependable, dutiful. These are all rather old-fashioned words, old-fashioned concepts even, but I think that they sum up what she brought to the role of monarch. We recall the pledge she made on her 21st birthday. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Well, she truly remained true to that pledge. It was a life of finely judged service, true to the principles of constitutional monarchy, driven by duty, sustained by faith. And we recall also the message that she issued when she reached her 70th birthday in February of this year. You remember the message that was issued? She wrote, I remain eternally grateful for and humbled by the loyalty and affection that you continue to give me. She said, I look forward to continuing to serve you with all of my heart. And she signed that message, your servant, Elizabeth R. Well, that servant has gone. The end of the reign of Elizabeth II, Elizabeth the Great, as many people will regard her. That reign has ended. And we have a new king.
Yes.
The crown passes invisibly, but immediately, imperceptibly. Charles is now our king and our head of state. Camilla is now queen consort. It remains to be seen what name he will take, but we will refer to him as the king, and he will lead the nation's mourning for his mother. As you say, she came to the throne just a few years after the end of the Second World War. She succeeded to the throne in 1952 after the death of her father. And on the night of her coronation, in a broadcast on the BBC, she said, throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your service. And as that message, and as the message she issued on the 70th anniversary of her accession showed, if there is one word that I think is the key to the success of her reign, I would suggest it's not actually duty, the word which is normally associated with her, it's humility. Because for all of the grandness of her position, here is the coronation, the imperial state crown being lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. For all the grandness of her position, it never went to her head. She had, I think, an instinctive understanding that as a hereditary monarch, she had to win the trust of the people of this country and the other countries of which she was queen. And that, I believe, is what she did. She gained it and she kept it. She kept the monarchy strong. Now, of course, there have been a few bumps along the way. It would be extraordinary if there hadn't been. Bumps which have almost without exception been caused by other members of her family. But she pursued her role with that sense of humility and by putting duty first. And she was at heart, people who knew her, it's funny to talk in the past tense now, isn't it? She was a very down-to-earth, a straightforward and unpretentious woman, rather reserved, certainly in her early years. There was none of that sort of vainglorious and overbearing behaviour that we've sometimes perhaps seen with other members of her family. For 70 years she's been the constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives, the head of the nation, as she's sometimes been referred to, above politics, but with a shrewd interest in and a grasp of politics and of political figures. So we now look back on, and there will be so many tributes, so many tributes now, as people take this in, as they come to terms with their own emotions. And I'm quite sure there will be many people who are very emotional at this moment, as they learn of this news, the death of the Queen. But this nation and so many other nations will now pay tribute to this long life of service which has now ended.
Symbolised everywhere, Nick. The flags are being lowered, and the rainbow along with the lowered flag at Windsor, the favourite home of the Queen. So many years. Flags lowered already at Buckingham Palace. And so many elements, Nick, of your appreciation and tribute will be echoed by political leaders at Downing Street. We're expecting Liz Truss to say something fairly soon. The Prime Minister will offer her own sympathy to the royal family, and she will, of course, have her own words of appreciation for the long service of Her Majesty. And there'll be other political leaders too wanting to pay tribute to a lifetime of service, a lifetime of humble commitment to duty, as Nick was saying, and of taking the role as seriously as it's possible to take it. Very much in line with the teaching that her father had shared with her all those years ago in Buckingham Palace, King George VI. Very proud of his two daughters, and took a long time to offer the experience and learning to his elder daughter Elizabeth. And there you have, at the railings of Buckingham Palace, they are, in line with tradition, posting the formal notice. And that notice will say that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died peacefully today at Balmoral in Scotland, at the age of 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history. A lifetime of service to people in the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and in many parts of the world. An example of leadership which didn't stray into the realm of politics, and for lots of people the ideal symbol of what a constitutional monarchy should be like. Well, now the world has been told, and the official notice has been posted as the palace staff make their way back into what was the Queen's home. It is now the home of the King and the Queen Consort, because Prince Charles is now King Charles. It remains to be seen whether he will call himself Charles as King, but we are assuming that he will. And this now is the home of the new monarch, the King, and his consort, the Queen Consort. Crowds still gathering at Buckingham Palace because the news has travelled very rapidly here and at Windsor and at all the other royal residences. But of course people will be following these events closely on their televisions and their mobile devices and all kinds of different means of spreading the news and social media as people come to terms with what's happened. And as Nick was saying memorably a few moments ago, it's a seismic event. It's the longest reigning monarch in British history who's left us at the age of 96, and it's not a surprise when someone of that age suffers ill health and eventually passes away. But what is left, of course, is the reflection on what was achieved and the kind of life that was led and the sense of duty and the sense of loyalty and, as Nick was saying, the sense of humility, which seems rather bizarre to say for a monarch, but someone who had a sense of service to others. And this was a theme that was repeated so often in the Queen's statements at great milestones in her life, and those 4 great jubilees, where she underlined the notion of service, to be at the service of the people, and to appreciate the fact that people were loyal to her as a monarch, and appreciated the fact that she was of, well, incalculable value in terms of her service to Britain, having come to the throne at such a young age and with very little experience. At the age of 25, when she didn't expect to be in that position at all, her father suddenly dying in his 50s. A terrible blow, and then a huge burden for the young Queen to be bearing. But she did so, and with a strong sense of what the monarchy was meant to be, the sense that her father had shared with her. And as we said earlier, for those considering the nature of the reign, the longest reign in British history, it was in many senses a continuation of the reign of George VI. The crowds at the palace will have seen this formal announcement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral tonight and will be returning to London tomorrow. And that is the formal announcement to the world in the traditional way, the printed statement being fixed to the railings of Buckingham Palace. And that, when we see that, Nick, that is the chapter completed.
And the vehicles there outside Buckingham Palace are stopping. The word will be reaching people. People will be very shocked, I think, by this. I think it is very hard to take it in. But there is, as you say, the news. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, so presumably she must have died before the members of her family arrived at Balmoral, but they will have known, as they drove in through the gates, they will have known that the Queen, their mother, or their grandmother, had died. It doesn't make any reference as to whether the King was at her bedside, but we do know that Charles and Camilla had travelled across to Balmoral Castle, so one presumes that they will have been there at the end. And the Princess Royal as well, one must assume, though they have not said that. And of course there will be many arrangements, but before the arrangements there will be all the tributes. And those will be on a scale that we have really not seen before.
No. They've started, Nick, already, as you can imagine. President Biden, the White House, he and his wife saying our hearts and thoughts go to the Queen's family and the British people, of course, coming from our strongest ally. So you'd expect the statement to be warm and sincere, as it is. But as you say, Nick, it'll be just the start of countless tributes from world leaders, religious leaders, and of course, I think it's right to say this, from millions of people, from ordinary people who will want to be sharing their sense of loss.
Yes, yes, and that sense of loss will be deep and it will be widespread. As we've both been saying, people will feel a personal loss, that a person who they in some way knew or felt they knew has gone, who was always there, who was this reassuring presence, this embodiment of stability and continuity, and who personified the unity of the United Kingdom. It is, as I think you used the word, it is a seismic event in terms of the United Kingdom, and of course it, I think, will rather add to that sense of flux that we have at the moment.
Yes.
Of political change with a new Prime Minister, of economic crisis with all the energy costs, gosh. Who's giving a thought to that huge statement that the new Prime Minister made in the House of Commons today about that? There is war in Europe. Well, the monarchy, in one of those hard to put your finger on ways, is a stabilising and unifying force, and that will be the challenge now for Charles as king, and he, I'm sure, will want to act quickly. He will lead the mourning for his mother, for the Queen, but he will, I'm sure, also want to just indicate that he understands what is required as a constitutional monarch. He has already indicated that he does completely understand that it is a different role, that he will have to give up his interventions, but I think that he will reign in a slightly different way. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but each monarch brings something of their own personality to the role, and I think that Charles will try to continue his interest in some of those issues without in any way allowing politics or a political scope to come into it.
I'm told, Nick, that we are expecting a statement from the new king fairly shortly, so when we have that, we'll bring it right away. And as we look at these rather nice images of Her Majesty, of course engaged in one of the endless official engagements that she's done over the years, it's worth bringing in as well some remarks from the Dutch royal family, because the British royal family and the Dutch royal family have enjoyed close relations over the years. The Dutch royal family saying, "We remember Queen Elizabeth II with deep respect and with great affection. Steadfast and wise, she dedicated her long life to serving the British people. We feel a strong bond," this is the King of the Netherlands, "we feel a strong bond with the United Kingdom and his royal family, and we share their sorrow at this time. We're very grateful for our country's close friendship, to which Queen Elizabeth made such an unforgettable contribution." King Willem-Alexander and Queen Maxima and Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands offering their tributes. Just worth underlining the scale and the importance and the impact of what we are reporting today. It is a huge milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. The fact that the Queen, who was crowned back in 1953, has died peacefully at Balmoral in Scotland this afternoon. The King, that is King Charles, and the Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral this evening, and then we will be expecting them to return to London tomorrow. And that's a statement also expected from the new king sometime in the next maybe 20 minutes or so, but these images remind us of those happy days which really do just set the foundations really for a hugely successful and productive reign. Coronation Day back in 1953, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, just on the right-hand side there, the Duke of Edinburgh just behind her. But the Queen, the young Queen, became Queen at the age of 25, acknowledging the huge crowd that had gathered on Coronation Day back in 1953, where we're looking at the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. And here we are in 2022, reporting on the Queen's death at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace formally making that announcement a short while ago, saying that the Queen, whose health was the matter of a bulletin earlier today, with doctors expressing their concern, Queen died peacefully at Balmoral during the course of this evening. We don't have a precise time, but we do know that several members of the royal family were at Balmoral, and they were no doubt in a meeting with the doctors and the experts when they got there, and indeed the news came fairly soon after their arrival that Her Majesty had indeed passed away at the age of 96. Earlier today, they were saying that she was being kept comfortable in Balmoral. There was no sign of any move to hospital, no sign of any further intervention by doctors in a different kind of facility. All the care was being done at Balmoral itself. And indeed, a few hours later came the very sad news, which will affect many millions of people, that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, having lost her husband, Prince Philip, back in 2021. And on the Queen's death, we now have a new king. Prince Charles will become King Charles, possibly, with a consort who will be the Queen Consort, known as Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become king. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. We are expecting a statement from the new King fairly shortly. We're also expecting a statement from the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who visited the Queen in Balmoral just a couple of days ago, and was able to accept the invitation to form a government in that audience, where the Queen was seen to be smiling broadly and looked very focused on the task at hand, albeit looking rather frail. Well, that was 2 days ago, and yesterday came the news that she was unable to fulfil an appointment with the Privy Council. That's the senior ministers in the new government of Liz Truss. It was to be an online meeting, but nonetheless the Queen was judged to be too tired, and she needed to rest. She wasn't well, and her doctor suggested last evening that that meeting should not be held, and she was resting last night. And by this morning, indeed late morning, the Queen's doctors were clearly very concerned, and that the Queen's condition had deteriorated fairly rapidly. And then by lunchtime we had the statement that her health was causing particular concern. And then we saw the members of the family arriving at Balmoral. And shortly after that, within the past half hour or so, came the formal statement that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. We have statements from lots of world leaders. We'll come to them in a second. The President of the Irish Republic, for example, Michael D. Higgins. The Queen visited the Irish Republic back in 2011. She was the first British monarch to visit the Irish Republic. It was a hugely successful meeting. I've got a very warm welcome there. Her Majesty, says President Higgins, served the British people with exceptional dignity. Her personal commitment to her role and extraordinary sense of duty were the hallmarks of her period as Queen, which will hold a unique place in British history. There aren't many who will disagree with that. That's President Michael Higgins of the Republic of Ireland. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has just issued this statement, which of course will be welcomed by Charles as the new king as well. He says, "May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace and rise in glory." Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. As she had done before, she reminded us of a deep truth about ourselves, says the Archbishop. "We are a people of hope who care for one another." A very warm tribute and a sincere tribute from the Archbishop himself. I think we can bring a little more from the Archbishop, and it's a very eloquent tribute, as you'd imagine, from Justin Welby. "It's with profound sadness," says the Archbishop, "that I join the nation, the Commonwealth and the world in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen. My prayers are with the King and with the royal family. May God draw near them and comfort them in the days and weeks and months ahead." The Archbishop goes on, "As we grieve together, we know that in losing our beloved Queen, we have around the world." The tribute there by the new king, by Charles, who became king immediately on his mother's death. So the tone, as one would expect, is loving, it's warm, it's respectful, and it just underlines the affection in which the Queen was held. We are expecting the Prime Minister in just a moment, Nick, but that statement was moving, wasn't it?
It was, yes. My beloved mother, a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all the members of my family. Interesting that it's not signed as King Charles. There's no name on it. It has been suggested that he might take another name as king, but I suspect it'll be tomorrow before we learn that. But yes, it's quite hard to sum up the profound nature of this moment, isn't it, really? They have lost their mother or their grandmother. They must grieve privately, but Charles must now begin to assert himself and begin his reign. I'm sure he will travel around the country. He will... I mean, this is challenging. It would be challenging for anybody, and we're about clearly to hear now from the Prime Minister.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties, as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was installed at Downing Street just a couple of days ago, having met the Queen in that audience, really presenting her own tribute with some personal elements in that, but also revealing something which we were hoping to hear, either from the Prime Minister or from the Palace, which is that Charles will be known as King Charles III, Nick, and that is at least confirming the title that he has adopted.
Yep, that answers that question. And of course, for him, for Charles, there will be conflicting emotions at this moment. There is the great sadness that he refers to in his statement of the loss of his mother. But at the same time, this is the moment when he finally achieves his destiny. He is the oldest and longest serving heir apparent in British history. He will be the oldest person to become king in British history. Previously, the oldest person was William IV, who became king in 1830, aged 64. Well, Charles is 73. And he will know that this is a challenge for anybody to step into the position so successfully occupied for so many years by Elizabeth II. And he has had a long time to think about this. He's never spoken about it publicly because that really would not be appropriate. The only clue he has given is that he fully understands that the role of monarch is different to that of Prince of Wales. So he has assured people that he will not meddle, which is the one great concern that people have had about him. It was the one area in which, one area among many, that the Queen, Elizabeth, was so successful. She understood the limits, what a monarch needed to do, how far a monarch could go. And Charles, one can be confident, also must understand that. So he will reign in his own way, but within the constraints of the constitutional monarchy. So he understands that, though he may, I think, attempt to be a little bit more proactive than the Queen has been throughout, or the Queen was throughout her reign. He, I think, will attempt to use the convening powers. But that, again, that is really all for the future. He will, I think, travel around the country. He will want to establish himself, want to lead the nation's mourning for his mother, now that the reign, the long reign of Elizabeth II has ended.
I just want to share again the statement made by the new king. This is the statement by King Charles III, and he says, the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. And Charles goes on, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country and the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. And during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. A statement by the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, because the Prime Minister has confirmed that the Queen, now having died at the age of 96, has been succeeded by Charles and will be known as King Charles III and the Queen Consort, of course, Camilla. Let's go to Downing Street then, where the Prime Minister Liz Truss has just delivered her tribute, and join Chris Mason, our political editor. The Prime Minister certainly wanted to pay tribute to the Queen's long record of service, Chris, but also wanted to, I suppose, introduce a little bit of a personal element, in the sense that she said that the Queen for her had been very much someone who'd inspired her over the years.
Yes, that's right, Hugh, and a Prime Minister just 48 hours in office, tasked with finding the words for such a profound moment in our country's history. Just picking out a few of the sentences that struck me in the statement from Liz Truss just a few moments ago. The rock on which modern Britain was built, she reflected about Her Majesty the Queen. Britain is a great country today because of her and because of her stability and strength, that she encapsulated and personified, the Prime Minister said, the spirit of Great Britain. As you just mentioned in conversation with Nick, the news from the Prime Minister that the King will be known as His Majesty King Charles III. And then the profound solemnity and gravity of those final words from Liz Truss. God save the King.
When we look at the change that's now happening, Chris, because clearly there are big implications for Downing Street and government, given the very strong axis that exists between the office of the monarch and the executive and parliament in this constitutional monarchy that we have. What will be happening, do you think, now in terms of the administration in Downing Street? What are the things that they will need to come to terms with, given that we now have a new monarch?
It'll be a profound change, a significant change at a time politically of considerable flux. It is, of course, a new team that have moved into Downing Street, not just the Prime Minister, but so many of her senior advisers in the last 48 hours or so, themselves trying to work out how the very heart of British government and the British state on the political side operates. Now, within that and beyond that, in the broader governmental machine, are procedures and protocols in terms of the conversations that take place between Downing Street as an institution and Buckingham Palace, the monarchy, as an institution. But nonetheless, obviously, it's such a profound historical moment. Things will change. A Prime Minister who had just had a single audience with the Queen, that first audience also being her last one. And in future, of course, those audiences, they are gatherings that take place once a week, where the Prime Minister heads to see the monarch and has a period of time privately in their company, knowing in the political world it being the one opportunity where you can talk very candidly to someone without the prospect of it being leaked, that in the future for the Prime Minister will be very different from the one that she might have anticipated, from the one that so many of her predecessors, 14 of her predecessors, have enjoyed that conversation that they had with the Queen, more recently taking place remotely, traditionally taking place physically at Buckingham Palace, where Prime Minister after Prime Minister, 15 in total including Liz Truss, were able to spend that time with the Queen and tap into a well of knowledge and savvy and wisdom about world affairs that was unprecedented. A stateswoman of a longevity greater than any other on earth, and with that Prime Ministers would so often reflect in interviews and in their memoirs just how valuable a relationship that was. Firstly, as I say, because it was grounded in that sense of solemnity and privacy, but secondly because of the wisdom and experience that the Queen was able to bring.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason, our political editor. And as you can imagine, lots of political leaders are wanting to pay their own tributes. From Scotland, and of course, let's just underline the fact that the Queen passed away at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire. So the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has been sharing her response to what's happened today in the Queen's death. She said it was a profoundly sad moment for the UK, the Commonwealth and the world. And then the First Minister goes on to say the Queen's life was one of extraordinary dedication and service. And she said, on behalf of the people of Scotland, I convey my deepest condolences to the King and to the royal family. First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, with the statement that she issued just a few moments ago. The time is 7:20, and you're watching this extended coverage from BBC News on this very, very sad day, because we are reporting the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth, the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life over a span of 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become King Charles III. Now, within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released the formal statement. It said this: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That is the brief statement stating the events of the past hour or so and the fact of the Queen's death at the age of 96 after the longest reign in the history of the United Kingdom. And Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is with us. By now, Nick, of course, this news will be around the world. And that is why we are seeing, of course, responses from countries as far afield as Japan and the United States, and of course European countries, the European Union. Those tributes will come in. But for the people of the UK, we mentioned earlier that of course we were thinking about the impact on the royal family. Let's dwell then on the impact on the people of the United Kingdom, for whom the Queen has been this symbol, not just of authority, but a symbol of real solidity and of consistency over the years. Taking that symbol away, albeit with a new monarch, King Charles III, who's a very familiar figure, but taking that symbol away will have an effect on people's lives, even those who are not dedicated monarchists.
It is a huge loss. And I think many people will find it disorientating, the feeling that this person who has been such a constant presence in the background of Commonwealth. The United Kingdom has, as it were, dallied with Europe and has sort of moved away from it. When she came to the throne, a majority of people believed that she was chosen by God. Yeah. There was still, of course, a much greater sense of deference. We're seeing some images here from the earlier stages of her life. She was, there she is, presenting the World Cup to Bobby Moore in 1966, and of course meeting so many American presidents there with the first George Bush, and pursuing her great passion of horse racing. In just so many facets of national life, the Queen was there, this dutiful figure, driven by faith, propelled by duty, with this sense of humility that we were talking about earlier. She was down to earth and straightforward, and as I said, she never let it go to her head. She realized that she was there by an accident of birth, and that she needed to win the trust and respect of her people, and that perhaps is something that not every member of her family has fully appreciated. Well, she did, in the same way that her father did, and in the same way I think that Charles has also appreciated that, because he has worked so hard. Prince Charles, you know, been a few controversies and difficulties for him, but he has set out during his time as Prince of Wales to win the respect of people and to show that he is worthy of the office and the position to which he has now succeeded. There he is with his mother. He is now mourning the loss of that mother and the loss of the Queen as he becomes king. Now, we must assume that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has not, as it were, jumped the gun in naming him as King Charles III. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but we must assume that that is correct.
Just as you speak, Nick, your timing is impeccable. Clarence House has literally, in the last couple of seconds, confirmed that it is King Charles III. So, well done on prompting that.
Very good.
Very good. So it is King Charles III, that's official. And I'm just going to interrupt a second, Nick, if I may, because Boris Johnson, who of course was Prime Minister until just a few days ago, has issued this statement. It's fairly lengthy, but I'm going to just read through it because well, you'll understand why. This is our country's saddest day, says Boris Johnson. In the hearts of every one of us, there is an ache at the passing of our Queen, a deep and personal sense of loss, far more intense perhaps than we expected. In these first moments since the news, I know that millions and millions of people have been pausing whatever they've been doing to think about Queen Elizabeth and about the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. These are the words of Boris Johnson. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. And Mr. Johnson says, wave after wave of grief is rolling across the world, from Balmoral, where our thoughts are with all the royal family, and breaking far beyond this country and throughout the great Commonwealth of Nations. That she so cherished, and which cherished her in return. As is so natural with human beings, it is only when we face the reality of our loss that we truly understand what has gone. And it is only really now that we grasp how much she meant for us, how much she did for us, how much she loved us. Boris Johnson continues, as we think of the void that she leaves, we understand the vital role that she played, selflessly and calmly embodying the continuity and unity of our country. We think of her deep vision, her wisdom, her historic understanding, seemingly inexhaustible but understated sense of duty. Relentless though her diary must have felt, she never once let it show. And to tens of thousands of events, great and small, she brought her smile and her warmth and her gentle humour.
That, sadly, as we mourn the passing of the Queen, we accept that the head of state is now the King. But yes, Boris Johnson, I think, capturing in those few hundred words what so many people, so many people will be feeling just right now.
Let's bring in our home editor, Mark Easton, because Mark, you again are in a perfect place, really, given your brief, to talk a little about the change that this represents. It's been called seismic, it's been called great, it's been called fundamental. How do you read the kind of process and impact of change that the Queen's death will produce?
Well, Hugh, here at Buckingham Palace, you can see the way the public is already reacting. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people have already turned up. Applause breaking out. Just behind me now, people are pouring down the Mall, coming to pay their respects. King Charles III, as we must now learn to call him, talked about the respect and affection that the British people had for his mother. And you can feel that in the crowd here. It's a sombre atmosphere. Some people, I have to say, are close to tears. This was a very personal relationship with a woman who embodied something very special about their country. She was, I think, the keystone in the nation's architecture, the solid and immovable piece that sort of defined the nation's image of itself. And that is why I think when that keystone is removed, this is a very difficult and perhaps a dangerous moment for the United Kingdom. We've talked a lot about constancy and consistency and the solidity that she brought to this country. But I think that one shouldn't think that constancy is the same as inactivity, because this was a queen like a fish swimming, keeping sort of still in a fast-flowing stream. She remained solid and still while everything was moving around her, and that required constant adaptation and change, and she put enormous thought into how she could, what she described as, ease the process of change for her people. People are arriving here. Her subjects are arriving at Buckingham Palace. Some have brought flowers already. What's interesting, I think, about this crowd, I think it says something very important about Queen Elizabeth. This is a crowd of every generation and every background. There are a lot of young people, a lot of people from ethnic minorities. It's a very mixed crowd, and she was a queen that was able to be a figurehead for people from whatever background in Britain. As I say, we've got tens of thousands of people here already. I think this is going to become the focal point for that national grief over the next few days. And we will remember, some of us, the extraordinary scenes here after the death of Diana. And I think we will see something not dissimilar with the loss of Queen Elizabeth. This is a huge moment for the country. I think it's going to be very difficult for people to adjust. I think that as well as sadness, people are feeling unsettled. And this was already at a time when there was quite a lot of foreboding about the winter to come. So I think this is going to be quite a moment for Britain and a time for people to pull together and support each other.
Mark, thank you so much. Mark Easton with some thoughts there on what this event, what this loss means for people across the UK and indeed beyond. And as we look at these images, I have to say there are lots of very heartfelt and eloquent tributes being paid here in the UK and around the world. The former Prime Minister Sir John Major calling the Queen selfless and wise with a wonderful generosity of spirit. He said he was greatly saddened the news of her death. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair, we've lost not just our monarch but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who more than any other brought our country together and kept us in touch with our better nature and personified everything which makes us proud to be British. And Mr Blair goes on, she was not only the respected and loved monarch, she was respected because of the qualities of duty and decency and integrity and fidelity which she embodied, and loved because of the love and affection that she bestowed on us. And we will mourn her and we will miss her. That was Tony Blair speaking earlier on. Lots of other tributes from around the world. President Macron, the French President. Her Majesty the Queen embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. And President Macron says, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted Queen who's left a lasting impression on her country and her century. And then President Zelensky of Ukraine, that troubled country, sending this message. On behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire UK and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then we have the German president too, Herr Steinmeier, saying Queen Elizabeth was a woman who shaped a century, and Her Majesty enjoyed the highest respect in the whole world. A very concise statement, but one that conveys the fundamental truth about the life and the times. Let's think about the United States. There are statements from President Trump, former President Trump, former President Obama, but I've just received this from President Biden, and this has just come in from the White House. So as we look at these images of the Queen's long life from her coronation back in 1953 all the way to this year in 2022, President Biden says, in a world of constant change, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who've never known their country without her. And that is such a powerful theme today, as Nick and I have been discussing. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth, and the 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all around the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. And we see the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, and they too, with their mobile devices, will be aware of lots of these tributes being paid as they gather there. And now that the formal announcement has been fixed to the main railings in front of the palace, as it is done at times of great events like this, happy events and sad events. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all round the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. Supported by her beloved Prince Philip, the Queen led always with grace, an unwavering commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. And President Biden goes on to say she endured the dangers and the deprivations of a world war alongside the British people, and rallied them during the devastation of a global pandemic to look to better days ahead. Queen Elizabeth II, this is how he concludes was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. And as a concluding thought, he says this: in the years ahead, we in the United States look forward to continuing a close friendship with the King and the Queen Consort. Today, the thoughts and prayers of people all across the United States are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief. We send our deepest condolences to the royal family, who are not only mourning their Queen, but their dear mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. And her legacy will loom large in the pages of British history and in the story of the world. I have to say, they're very moving tributes. I haven't been able to come across a few of them yet, because I know they're just waiting there for me, from the Obamas and President Trump and other leaders. But they are moving, they are eloquent, and Nick, they really do stop you in your tracks, and they just underline the fact that, you know, the appreciation for what the Queen achieved and what she represented is truly global. It's not, you know, we tend to talk about the Commonwealth. Of course, that's important. It's beyond that.
As Boris Johnson said, it's only when you lose somebody that you really appreciate just who they were and how much you valued them. And the same words are in so many of these tributes: grace and duty and dignity and constancy. She was someone who personified simple qualities like decency and tolerance, who encouraged politicians to be the best that they could be, who encouraged all of us, really, to be the best of ourselves, because she did embody those old-fashioned concepts. And she did that for decade after decade. And she was that most important thing for a monarch. She was someone who unified people. She brought people together. And the challenge for Charles now will be to continue to seek to do the same, particularly at this moment when there are pressures within the United Kingdom against unity. And so Charles, I think, will be very much aware of the challenges that he faces and the task that he must now begin.
Well, Charles's younger son, Harry, is, we understand, arriving at Balmoral just about now. I think we're expecting the arrival in a few minutes. Here we are, the entrance to the Balmoral estate, but the Duke of Sussex, who's travelling alone, we believe, because his wife, Meghan, is not accompanying him, but he's arriving. He didn't come with the main royal party earlier, with the Duke of Cambridge, his brother, and with Prince Andrew and with Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. He wasn't with that group. They flew up to Aberdeen quite a few hours ago, and they've been in Balmoral since then. They joined the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, who were already there at the Queen's side. So Prince Harry's arrival is considerably later than that, and indeed it's quite a while after the official announcement of the Queen's death at the age of 96. But we understand that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way there, and he's about to arrive at Balmoral at this time, where he will join the other members of the royal family. And as we've already heard, the King, King Charles III, and the Queen Consort, they will be staying at Balmoral tonight. They're not returning to London tonight. We had that statement earlier from the King. And they will be returning to London tomorrow. We've also heard from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who paid her tribute to the Queen and thanked her for a lifetime of service, and reflected indeed the great sense of national sadness at the news that came today, because although the Queen was 96 and had health problems, these images will tell you everything about recent years, where of course she's really just done her best to carry on despite advancing years and health problems. And she and Prince Philip, who left us 2 years ago, were full of the joys during those Jubilee celebrations. And now we have some of the tributes already arriving. And they'll be arriving, of course, at Balmoral, they'll be arriving at Buckingham Palace, they'll be arriving at Windsor. So these will be local people who are used to the royal presence in Balmoral. They are very used to seeing the royal family around in these summer months. They know full well how fond the Queen was of Balmoral as a home and as a base. And they will be wanting to pay their respects as locals who tended to leave the royal family alone because they were used to seeing them around, and the Queen certainly felt very much at home there, having spent so many years there with her family and indeed with her parents when she was growing up. So sometime along this road we're expecting Prince Harry to arrive. It's going to be in probably one of those vehicles that we saw earlier, maybe a Range Rover or something of that kind, but they're still expecting his arrival there. And he will, of course, join the rest of the family, and they will no doubt be reflecting on the loss that they've suffered. They'll be sharing the sense of grief, and they'll be thinking as well about what the future holds with the new king, King Charles III. As Clarence House has confirmed, he wishes to be known King Charles III, who will be reigning with his Queen Consort Camilla, and thoughts already will be turning respectfully, sensibly but respectfully, towards the events of the next few days, leading of course to the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth, which will take place in probably 10 days' time, but we need to have that confirmed. The plans, of course, have been there for a long time. They always are. They've been revised over the years because that's how these things work. But they will need to be finalised given these circumstances because, of course, the Queen has passed away at Balmoral in Scotland and not at Windsor, not at Buckingham Palace, so the arrangements will inevitably be adjusted in the next few days and the lead up to the state funeral itself. So there'll be some talk about that, and it's fine for us to talk a little bit about that, but what we're really doing today is reflecting on people's sense of loss and what's happened today, and the fact that British life has changed, the fact that the course of our history has changed, and that is symbolised by Buckingham Palace and that empty balcony tonight where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions, on so many happy occasions indeed, during Jubilees and the end of the Second World War with her beloved father and mother and sister Margaret. So it's been the scene of so many great national events when the crowds congregate around that palace to declare their support for the royal family or indeed to express their sympathy in bad times. And the crowds are now building up. The news, which came a short while ago, clearly filtering through, and lots of people now wanting to just stand at the palace, look at the palace, want to be seen at the palace to express their sense of loss and to express their sense of sympathy with the royal family, with King Charles on the loss of his mother, and of course with the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, who've also lost a mother, and the Duke of Cambridge, who's lost his grandmother, as has the Duke of Sussex, who's on his way to Balmoral. Of course, a grandmother and a great-grandmother too. So there's generations of the royal family affected by the news today. That's before you start thinking about friends of the royal family and about generations of people in the UK who've known nothing else. You'd have to be in your 80s, basically, to be in any position to say that you could perhaps remember a time when the Queen wasn't sovereign, wasn't the monarch. And here we have dusk in London and the Queen Victoria Memorial glinting in the evening light, with the crowds gathering around that memorial and congregating at the gates and the railings of Buckingham Palace. The palace, which is, of course, the symbol of the royal family in central London, but is not the usual residence of the royal family. that is Windsor Castle, which is usually a short ride away in a helicopter or indeed a car. And the Queen used to be very familiar with that journey, being ferried back and forth from Windsor to Buckingham Palace for the business of the day. And then, of course, Buckingham Palace, the great backdrop for so many of the huge ceremonial and state events that we are familiar with. And they include the Queen's Birthday Parade, which will become the King's Birthday Parade when that next happens, and that famous processional route along the Mall all the way to Horse Guards Parade, with the Queen until the mid-1980s was on horseback. She loved the horses, of course, as we know, not just riding, but also the horse racing, on that processional route for so many birthday parades, and indeed was in a position to enjoy the end of the parade in 2022 for the Platinum Jubilee. So many happy memories, and the crowds gathering are aware of them, but on a day when they're reflecting on a huge loss in our national life, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, who's died at the age of 96. I'm in a position to tell you what the Leader of the Opposition has been saying. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has issued his own statement in the past half hour or so. We mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign, says Sir Keir. It's a deep private loss for the royal family, and all our thoughts are with them at this time, and the nation shares in their grief. We will always treasure Queen Elizabeth II's life of service and devotion to our nation and the Commonwealth. Our longest serving and our greatest monarch, says Sir Keir. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon. As Britain changed rapidly around her, this dedication became the still point of our turning world. So as our great Elizabethan era comes to an end, we will honour the late Queen's memory by keeping alive the values of public service that she embodied. For 70 years, Sir Keir Starmer says, Queen Elizabeth II stood as the head of our country. But in spirit, she stood amongst us. Yet another moving tribute from our leaders there, one from Boris Johnson earlier and Liz Truss, and this one from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. There are others too, of course, from President Biden, President Obama, former President Trump, President Macron. All of these tributes coming in, all of them worth reading. They will no doubt be on the BBC News website for you to see, to just keep up with the tributes being paid, because they are moving, they're eloquent, and they are thoughtful. And it's well worth you having a look if you have a moment to do that. Now, you're watching BBC News, and this extended coverage continues this evening on the 8th of September 2022, because Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, the commanding presence in British public life for a span of 8 decades. The flags have been lowered at Buckingham Palace. The Queen died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has formally become King Charles III. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Charles, the new King, said this: the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. It's coming up to 8 o'clock in the evening. The lights are on in central London. The flags have been lowered. The crowds are gathering around the memorial by Buckingham Palace. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, still with me. And up at Balmoral, we are in a position to say that Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is either just about to arrive or has just arrived. He's certainly within minutes of arriving at Balmoral Castle itself. Some of the vehicles now pulling up, and they are the advanced vehicles, and there's the vehicle, the cavalcade, moving its way into Balmoral Castle itself, and we believe that is Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. And Nick, you're watching this with me, and that means that Harry has now joined his brother
Yes.
and his father and other members of the family.
Yes, as autumn descends on this bleak September day, there at Balmoral and also at Buckingham Palace, how striking are those images outside the palace, people feeling the need to come together at this moment in the nation's history, the day on which the Queen of the last 70 years has passed away. People need, I think, just the solace, the comfort of being with other people. The nation will begin its mourning, bells will be rung and guns will be sounded and church services will come together. I remember the words that were used, I think, by a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, who talked about service untiringly done, duty faithfully fulfilled. Everyone will have their words about the reign, the duty of Elizabeth II, as we all just pay our tributes now to a life of duty, of humility, of decency, as the process, the transition now to this new reign gets underway. And I expect we will hear from the new king tomorrow. There will also, of course, be an accession council when the Privy Council comes together. Not the full Privy Council, because there simply isn't room these days, but they will come together and they will confirm the succession, and they will, I imagine, at some point hear from the new king. And those statements by him will be important to set the tone for his reign, paying tribute to his mother on behalf of his family and the nation, but also setting out his aspirations, his wish, his ambition to be a force for unity and continuity and stability at a time when stability perhaps is in rather shorter supply than it has been at many other times. It is unsettling, as Mark Easton said. It is disorientating, and many people will feel that, and they will need to be reassured at this moment.
Nick, thanks again. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, with some thoughts there on the significance of today and the loss that people have suffered today and the country has suffered, and the fact that we no longer have a queen. We have a king, King Charles III, who has acceded to the throne immediately, the moment that his mother passed away. Lots of tributes which we can still share with you from political leaders, from religious leaders. For example, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who saw the Queen so many times, of course, during her period as Prime Minister, simply said this: "I want to place on record," says Theresa May, "that Her Majesty devoted herself unreservedly to a life of service." And that really does echo what so many others have been saying. It's interesting as well that the Duke of Cambridge, the new title, the Duke of Cambridge, the Duchess of Cambridge, William and Kate, of course, now being referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. So we'll see lots of these adjustments as the evening goes on. And here on BBC News, we will, of course, be bringing you more tributes from around the world and reflecting what people in communities across the United Kingdom are saying tonight after the death of the Queen. We'll take a pause for now. We'll be back for an extended edition of BBC News at 10. But we're going to join my colleague Clive Myrie now for more special coverage following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Goodbye for now.
The longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II, has died at the age of 96.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. God help me to make good my vow.
Over the course of 8 momentous decades, she witnessed social and economic change on a global scale. As Princess Elizabeth of York, she came to the throne at the age of 25, following the sudden death of her father, King George VI. During her lifelong reign, the Queen dealt with no fewer than 15 prime ministers, the first, Sir Winston Churchill, through to Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair and Boris Johnson. As head of the Commonwealth, she became the most travelled monarch in history, head of state of 15 countries at the end of her reign. The Queen's death comes just over a year after the passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, her consort for more than 70 years. Over the decades, the Queen was greeted by millions of people worldwide and met her subjects on thousands of engagements in the UK and well beyond. She was last pictured at Balmoral on Tuesday, asking Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, as the crown passes to a new king, Charles III, the Queen's death will be deeply felt by her family, by people across the United Kingdom and millions around the world. Good evening. The reign of the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom has come to an end with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace made the announcement just after 6:30 this evening. The Queen, who was 96, passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Members of the royal family had made the journey there on the news she was gravely ill. The Queen had been a commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades, and her eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become King Charles III. Buckingham Palace had issued this statement: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, in the last hour, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement: the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. Well, joining me now is Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent. Nick, I am 58 years of age. I've known no other monarch. And there are millions of people, we'll show the pictures a little bit later on, millions of people around the country, thousands outside Buckingham Palace, some outside Balmoral as well. They have known no other monarch either. This is a moment of profound change as well as profound sadness.
It is. It's a massive moment for the country, and I think people are just taking it in, absorbing it, and I would imagine that many millions of people are very emotional about this. The tears will flow in many households tonight as they just take in the news that this figure who has been there throughout most of our lives, in the background to our lives. I'm nearly 70 and I too have only ever known Elizabeth II on the throne. But the transition will take place. We have a new king. The crown passes imperceptibly, invisibly, immediately. He doesn't have to be sworn in. There doesn't have to be any ceremony to ensure that he is the new monarch. He is, as soon as one monarch dies, the crown passes. There will be challenges for him, there is no doubt. Anyone succeeding to such a huge figure who has occupied the throne for so long would face quite a challenging time to take up and pick up the threads of the constitutional monarchy in this country. But I think that this nation is, at its heart, feels very comfortable with the monarchy. Not everybody does. There are many people, of course, who don't, but the overwhelming majority do. And I think that Charles will rely on those instincts and the efforts that he will make in coming days to reassure people that he will reign in the style of his mother. There will be some differences because each monarch has an element of their own personality. He will be, I think, slightly more proactive than she was. But that's all for the future, really. Tonight, millions of people in this country and around the world will be reflecting back and feeling a deep and profound sadness, will be just appreciating what it is that has been lost to the United Kingdom. The monarch who has been so dutiful, who has embodied all the best of qualities of tolerance and decency, who has stood for unity and constancy and continuity. That reign has ended. And it is a moment of great sadness and solemnity for the United Kingdom.
For the United Kingdom and indeed her own family. Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our Scotland editor, James Cook, who is at Balmoral for us now. James, what can we say, really? Members of the family are there, and by Her Majesty's bedside when she passed away, we assume. Are all the immediate members of the family now with you?
Yes, the senior royals have all arrived here. Within the past half an hour or so, the sun, shrouded in cloud, set here on the Balmoral estate, setting too on the end of an era for the United Kingdom and for the world. And minutes after it did so, a car swept through the gate, several cars in fact, one of them we believe containing Prince Harry, to join his brother Prince William and his father the King in mourning for Queen Elizabeth, a monarch who has a special place in the heart of this nation, but who in return had, in her own words, a deep and abiding affection for Scotland. A moment, of course, here, behind these gates, for a family, first and foremost, to mourn, but a moment, too, for a nation to reflect on an extraordinary reign and on the end, the severing of links with the Second World War, the existential threat to this country which this nation survived, and also to the British Empire, which in many ways the Queen embodied for some of her reign. She also, I think it is fair to say, embodied the union of the crowns between Scotland and England, that union dating all the way back to 1603.
James, thank you. Our Scotland editor there live at Balmoral. We can go now to Mark Easton, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us. Now, Mark, we were seeing a little bit earlier some of the pictures of the crowds gathered where you are, many of them having been there in the rain throughout much of the day on the news that the Queen was gravely ill, and now many more people have turned up on the news that she has now passed away.
Yes, absolutely, Clive. People are seeking some way of connecting with this extraordinary moment in British history, and despite the rain, which is really quite heavy now, there are tens of thousands of people outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been growing over the last few hours, people streaming down the Mall. In the Mall as well, we've got a line of black taxi cabs, the cabbies wanting to pay their tribute. It's a very respectful, very sombre scene. You'll see quite a few camera lights are on. But I've also heard applause, and even at one point 3 cheers. Now, we don't know whether those were moments where the crowd wanted to show their appreciation for the Queen that they have lost, or whether they were perhaps greeting their new king, King Charles III. But whichever, it is a crowd which wants to be part of this moment. And it is a huge moment, I think, Clive, for this country, because the Queen was this solid, immovable piece of the nation's architecture, the keystone. And without that, there will be a sense, I think, of unease, of uncertainty. And it is in a moment when people will want to come together, will want to be with others, to share this moment and to see it through.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there at Buckingham Palace this evening, where crowds have gathered and have been gathering throughout the day. If you are just joining us, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and a commanding presence, of course, in British public life over 8 decades. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, and she was aged 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. Our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, now looks back on today's events.
Tuesday, the 6th of September, the last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen, as tributes began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen. above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development, before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospice in Berkshire. But these kind of visits had become rare over the past year, as the Queen relied on her walking stick, her mobility compromised. The royal household had tried to adapt to keep her active and visible. A golf buggy at the Chelsea Flower Show helped keep the Queen comfortable. But she had become noticeably thinner and frailer, something that severely limited her involvement in her own Platinum Jubilee celebrations, with her family increasingly representing her. At the weekend, her son stood in at the Braemar Highland Games, always a favourite event for the Queen that she reluctantly missed. Like so much of her life, the decline in her health was played out in public. Duty may have got harder to manage physically, but mentally, even emotionally, the Queen remained engaged and working to the very end.
Daniela, Ralph, with a sum up there of the events of the day. We're now joined by the former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir John Major. Sir John, it's very good of you to join us here on BBC News at this moment in time. Fears, of course, had been mounting throughout the day on the news from the Queen's medical team at Balmoral. What are your thoughts now on the passing of Her Majesty?
Well, it is heartbreaking news. It's news that one day we knew we would have, but we always hoped it would be delayed and would be some way away. It's very hard to take it in, that radiant smile which lights up a room and lights up a country is just not going to be live for us there anymore. Very hard to imagine. Most of the people in this country can remember nothing other than the Queen as monarch. Many of those who are elderly remember faintly the former king. But this is an enormous change for this country. It's a very big moment in history, a key pivotal moment. And I think there will be many tears shed tonight and over the next few days for Her Majesty the Queen.
I wonder, Sir John, given your interactions with the Queen, obviously, as Prime Minister, what your personal recollections are of meeting her.
There are so many recollections, and in many ways so different from what people might imagine. The private meetings that the Prime Minister has with the Queen, which are perhaps scheduled for 45 minutes, in my experience never lasted remotely under an hour, and often some way beyond it, which weren't entirely serious matters, just discussing the matters of the nation. There was a great deal of amusement in them, there was a great deal of humour in them, there was a bit of gossip in them. And apart from that, the serious matters that were discussed, I think people would have been extraordinarily surprised if they realised the depth of information the Queen had about the lives of people in every conceivable part of the United Kingdom. She was always extraordinarily well briefed. And on foreign affairs, of course, she would often say, if there was a difficulty of a foreign leader, well, I met him many years ago, or even I knew his father. There was always a wise word to be had. And those meetings with the Queen were one of the better parts of a Prime Minister's week.
I mean, that stability, that continuity that she brought, not just to the monarchy, I suppose, but to all of our lives, on being on the throne over such a long period. What are your thoughts on that now that she's passed?
Well, the continuity was very important, but I think there were other things as well. The example, the duty, the selflessness, the way in which other people were put first, the way in which she handled crisis with great stoicism when they occurred, as they occurred a number of times during her reign. They were all examples to people about how to behave in their own lives and examples for our country. And what you found going around the world is that the Queen was the face of the United Kingdom. When people around the world spoke of the Queen, they actually meant our Queen. That was the status she had in every part of the world. It was truly remarkable.
So, John, you talked about the stoicism she showed in times of crisis. We think back, of course, to 1992 and her Annus Horribilis speech, the fire at Windsor Castle as well. Her fortitude in dealing with those issues and those problems was something that the British people came to admire greatly in her, along with that sense of duty.
I think they were right to admire it. I sat along from her when she made the Annus Horribilis speech in 1992. A great deal had gone wrong, and there was, as you say, that dreadful fire in Windsor Castle, which many people didn't receive with the sympathy perhaps they should have done. But the Queen understood that. She put her head down and she quietly, silently, uncomplainingly got on with her job. There are very few people who would have handled it with the aplomb that she did. And I think that was in part because of her experience and in part because of her natural nature. She knew what one had to do to be a monarch. She knew when to keep out of controversy. She knew when to advise in private. She was almost faultless in the way in which she conducted the monarchy. And she leaves behind the monarchy in very good shape and a son who's been brought up to follow in precisely the same footsteps as King Charles III.
I wonder too, Sir John, about the affection with which she was held right around the world, particularly within the Commonwealth. And you travelled and you've seen the great affection that she had, and there will be millions across the globe now who will be particularly sad today.
Well, I have seen that affection at close quarters. Some 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was invited by the Queen to set up and chair the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, a charity to commemorate her 60 years on the throne. And we raised money from across the Commonwealth, and I asked the Queen what she wished us to do with the money that we had raised in her name. And she gave us two tasks. The first was to cure avoidable blindness across the whole of the Commonwealth, and the second was to seek out young Commonwealth leaders in every nation of the Commonwealth, 54 at the time, and help prepare them for leadership roles in later life. It was entirely a selfless request on her behalf and entirely typical of her.
Remarkable. Sir John Major, thank you very much indeed for giving us your reflections on Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Buckingham Palace. There we are, live pictures there, the lights lining up the front, and crowds of people. A bit difficult to make out, but you can see the odd umbrella there, the rain still coming down, flashlights from people taking pictures, and of course the press gathered there. And we're thinking around about a few hundred people, possibly even more, on the news that the Queen has died. That notice from Buckingham Palace announcing the news posted around about 6:40, 6:45 today, I think. The official announcement coming from Buckingham Palace that the Queen had died came just after 6:30, and it was after a RAF plane arrived on the tarmac at Aberdeenshire Airport to take members of the royal family to the Queen's bedside at Balmoral Castle. And these still the scenes, and you can see we've got a bit more light there now. You can see how many people have gathered. Quite a few, even with the rain pouring down there. Many people wanting to pay their respects. Many people fearing the worst, of course, after that rather alarming bulletin from the Queen's medical team coming out of Balmoral in Scotland just after 12:30 today, saying that there was concern over the Queen's health, but that she was comfortable while she was in the castle. And of course, a good few hours later, we got the news that the Queen had passed away. The very latest scenes there, outside Buckingham Palace. Well, the Queen spent much of the past few years at Windsor Castle, of course, living and working there throughout the coronavirus pandemic. Our correspondent Adina Campbell is there for us now. Adina, we've just seen the pictures outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of people, probably thousands of people out there gathered. What is the scene like where you are?
Well, hundreds of people have gathered here in Windsor tonight. Nearby, close to the High Street, others near the historic Long Walk. People of all ages, families have come out with young children, local residents, tourists have all come together to mark this day, and they've been paying their respects. Plenty have been leaving flowers. You may be able to see some of those floral tributes behind me, and others have lit candles. There was a poignant moment shortly after the announcement was made when a rainbow came out in the sky, and that's when people stood still. They were silent, they were reflective, and the news really then sunk in. And that happened shortly after the flag had been lowered, not quite at half-mast, but it had been lowered. This is a community that has had a deep, close connection with the Queen for many years. This was her main residence. She had spent a great deal of time here, particularly over the last 12 months, since she started experiencing those episodic mobility problems. And then, of course, she had spent a long time here with the Duke of Edinburgh before he died in April last year. They had been isolating here. People here are experiencing a sense of loss here tonight in Windsor. We've seen some emotional people who have been unable to hold back tears, consoling each other, hugging each other. And of course we know that this is a town that has rich royal roots. Just recently the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have moved here. We know the Duke of Cambridge is up in Balmoral, but we know tonight the Duchess of Cambridge is looking after their 3 young children because they started their first full day at school. So this is a community in shock, they are sad, and it's a community in mourning.
Adina, thank you. Adina Campbell there outside Windsor Castle, perhaps the Queen's favourite residence, her main residence. And the scenes out there, of course, scores and scores of people paying their respects outside the building. Well, as we've been hearing, our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has led the tributes to Queen Elizabeth, saying she was loved and admired by people around the world, and describing her as the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is in Downing Street now. Chris, we know that there was a discussion in Parliament today over the appalling cost of living crisis. That news and that debate overshadowed by the situation concerning the Queen. And I wonder now, given the stability that the Queen not only brought to the rest of British society, but also to the political life of this country, that is now sadly gone.
It has, Clive, yeah. And I think what we witnessed at lunchtime, caught in a moment, the very nature of the British Constitution, the way that we are governed, because there in the House of Commons was a debate ongoing where the House of Commons does what it is famous for, that it is the fulcrum of our democracy. It is the fulcrum and apex of angry argument to determine how we are governed. And there was that passionate argument going on about this whole huge and profound issue of energy bills, the government setting out its programme, the opposition criticising it, and then the passage of messages along the line, along the 2 front benches from a government minister to the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader, was on his feet at the time, and also to the Prime Minister. And you could tell, watching the chamber, you could tell the gravity of the news that was being passed on some 8 or 9 hours ago at lunchtime as senior politicians learned of the deteriorating health of the Queen. We've seen and heard, haven't we, in the conversation you just had with Sir John Major, the reflections of senior politicians on the value that they attached to their conversations with the Queen, the nature of that constitutional settlement I was talking about, meaning that the Queen is, if you like, plugged into democracy, but stands above it. And through that mechanism of the weekly audiences, Prime Ministers, 15 in total, Liz Truss only having that one audience with the Queen, that moment 48 hours ago when she became Prime Minister, having the chance every week to go and see the Queen in private and tap into what David Cameron, one of her Prime Ministers, her 12th Prime Minister, saying this evening, was the world's greatest public servant and the world's most experienced diplomat, tapping into that wisdom and counsel, knowing whatever advice was offered would be done so privately.
Indeed. Okay. Chris, thank you. Our political editor there, live at Downing Street. We're talking to Sir John Major a little bit earlier. The one of 15 Prime Ministers, of course, that the Queen interacted with, Liz Truss, the latest, whom she asked to become Prime Minister earlier this week. And if you're joining us for the first time, I should tell you that Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire at the age of 96. Now, the Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Following the death of his mother, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. We've got live pictures for you coming in at Buckingham Palace. Again, that is the scene where it's a little bit difficult to make out, but there are many, many members of the public there paying their respects. They've been gathering throughout the day on the news a little after lunchtime of concerns of the Queen's health made by her medical team at Balmoral. Of course, the kissing of the hands, the ceremony in which the prospective Prime Minister assumes the position, had to take place at Balmoral because the Queen was unable to travel down to London. That was, of course, with Liz Truss earlier this week. And one assumes the reasoning behind her not being able to travel to London was part of the drama of events earlier on today. But those pictures, the very latest outside Buckingham Palace, where around 6:40 this evening that notice was posted on the railings from Buckingham Palace, making it clear that the Queen had died peacefully. Well, the Queen was the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom and held a commanding presence in public life across the UK over 8 decades. Tonight, people have been reacting to the news of her sudden passing, and Lucy Manning has more.
She was long to reign over us, almost all of her life, and for most here, all of theirs. Through the streets of London they streamed to pay tribute to our Queen. What's your reaction to the news?
I'm so sad because she was a wonderful lady. She dedicated her whole life to the nation and we could just thank her for it. And we feel for her family today. It's a very sad day.
I'm so sad because she was a lovely, beautiful lady beautiful mother and a beautiful grandmother. Could just shed many tears for her. She was very much loved.
There is a real sense that this Queen was a history maker.
It's devastating. She's going to be missed by so many people. She affected so many lives, and she was an absolutely amazing monarch.
And what did she mean to you?
Well, I think as a woman, it's amazing to see a female at the helm of our country, and why I might not ever get the chance to see another woman as Queen.
She meant everything to me, my family, you know, a sense of community, you know, loyalty, you know, giving back to communities, serving, you know, the community as a whole. So she meant a lot to everyone here today. I think, you know, the biggest thing that I'll remember is, you know, her sense of sort of charity, giving back.
The crowds used to gather here in their hundreds of thousands to see the Queen on the Buckingham Palace balcony. As soon as her death was announced, they came back. There is a hush here, as the one constant in the country's life is no more. In the place where she died, Balmoral, the locals were enormously proud of their regal visitor who joined them each year.
Just very sad. It's just been a monarch for over 70 years and it's history, and we just wanted to be here to share our condolences to the like just be part of it kind of thing. Yeah.
It's really sad news to hear actually. It's that's the reason we came. We were hoping to pass on our regards or just to be here. So it's kind of sad actually.
Sad day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for everybody, I think. You know, I think the whole nation will come together and just, you know, feel the same. Yeah.
Although, you know, you never knew her or anything, but her significance was just incredible. And it doesn't really hit home, I don't think, until you hear something like this. And what she meant to us and what she meant to the country was absolutely incredible legacy.
At Buckingham Palace, no one here truthfully is sure what to do. But they know they want to be here, to stand, to mark the moment, to bring flowers, to remember. Her kingdom is united. In sorrow, yes, but also in admiration, in the sense that we have been fortunate to live in her era. Through change and turmoil, there has always been the Queen. Lucy Manning, BBC News, Buckingham Palace.
Lucy there talking about flowers marking the moment at Buckingham Palace. These are live pictures at Windsor Castle, and there, more floral tributes. Lit by a candle at the front there, as people remember. For many of them, the only monarch they've ever known. I began this broadcast a few minutes ago, pointing out that I've known no other queen at the age of 58, and those little children there. They're now going to be growing up in a world where it is Charles III who will be their sovereign. And people turning up continually throughout the evening as the light has dimmed. The flashlights there in the corner there of some of the press who've recorded this moment as well, and continuing flowers being put down there as people remember. And we're going to go back to Buckingham Palace too. I'll show you the live pictures there. In the darkness, hundreds of people, at least hundreds, but I suspect possibly even thousands, have gathered there now. And there they are. The rain's still coming down. It's been raining throughout the day, and despite that, people have been willing to deal with the elements. Their umbrellas there bobbing about in the wind, as many of them reflect on a life of extraordinary selflessness and grit, to a degree, through some of the trials and tribulations of her own family, it has to be said. And you can get a much clearer sense of the rain pouring down there in the lights outside Buckingham Palace, right in the heart of central London. Well, it was in Scotland where the Queen passed away, and political leaders there have been paying tribute to the monarch. In the last few minutes, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, described the Queen's death as a profoundly sad moment, describing her life as one of extraordinary dedication and service. Let's go now to Sarah Smith at Holyrood in Edinburgh. Sarah, what else have you been hearing from the political establishment in Scotland?
Well, already people here are turning up at Holyrood Palace, the Queen's official residence in Edinburgh, with flowers to pay their respects, and we're hearing of their sorrow and sadness at the passing of Queen Elizabeth, and political leaders all joining in with that sentiment. And it's partly because the Queen had a really very obvious affection for Scotland, and that's one that was reciprocated by many, many people here. It was just last year at the opening of the Scottish Parliament, when Scotland's politicians were all gathered there together, that she talked to them of her deep and abiding affection for this wonderful country, she called it, and she spoke of the many, many happy memories her and Prince Philip had shared in Scotland. She came here frequently as a child before she was Queen, and her first official visit to Scotland as the monarch took place just 3 weeks after the coronation, when she and her husband came here to Edinburgh and toured through the streets, and he was, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh. And then in the decades since then, she was a very frequent visitor. Every summer, she would come and spend a week here at Holyrood Palace before going up to Balmoral. She would take part in all sorts of official engagements, including hosting every summer a garden party for thousands of Scots to be invited to it. And it's because of these connections that politicians here are saying that they feel so profoundly sad, like the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
For more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth has been the great constant in our national life. She has inspired us, on occasion comforted us, and always personified values we hold dear. Throughout her reign, she performed her duties with exceptional wisdom, dedication and fidelity. Scotland loved, respected and admired her. And by all accounts, Her Majesty was rarely happier than when she was here in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, a fact I have been privileged to observe personally. I hope it will be a source of comfort to her family that she spent her final days in a place that she loved so much.
Nicola Sturgeon there talking about the respect and admiration that she felt for the Queen, partly because of her affection for Scotland, but also because of her sense of service and duty. And that's why we're hearing politicians from all sides of the political spectrum absolutely agreed that they owe a great debt to the monarch who served the country so well for so very many years. I think it's notable here in Scotland as well that throughout the years of debate that there have been about Scottish independence, the SNP were always at pains to stress that the Queen would remain the head of state if Scotland ever were to become independent. That's because they feared it would be a vote loser if they were to suggest that an independent Scotland would cut ties with the royal family. That's a measure of the affection and the respect that the Queen was given here in Scotland.
Indeed, Sarah, thank you for that. Sarah Smith there at Holyrood, the Queen's official residence in Edinburgh. Actually, the Queen had more Scottish monarchs in her ancestry than English ones. So that's an interesting thought to ponder there. We're going to go to some more floral tributes being placed outside Windsor. This is the scene this evening. A few candles as well have been lit there. Windsor, perhaps the Queen's favourite residence and her main residence. We talked a little bit to Sir John Major about the Queen's fortitude and strength during that awful fire that engulfed the castle, and how she coped with that and simply got on with things. And it's that sense of duty and strength that has come to be admired by so many people throughout her long reign, and now will be sorely missed by many people, not just in this country, but quite frankly right around the world. And more people there this evening. What time is it? 9:15, coming out. The rain has held off there. It's very rainy down in Buckingham Palace, but there people still making and marking their respects to our departed Queen. And this is the scene outside Buckingham Palace tonight. as we've been seeing throughout the evening, many more people turning up there as well. Some people perhaps hearing the news for the first time and deciding that perhaps they need to do something that is important to them in perhaps laying flowers outside one of the official royal residences. And there, despite that rain teeming down, it's been bucketing it down for much of the day, frankly, but still, so many people have been wanting to get out there and mark this incredible moment in British history. And in Northern Ireland, leaders across the political spectrum have been paying their tributes to the Queen, praising her efforts to advance peace and reconciliation. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page is live at Stormont for us now. Chris, just sum up what you've been hearing from those people who have been marking the Queen's death with their own messages.
Yes, Clive, here at Stormont, the home of the Northern Ireland Assembly, 2 flags are flying at half-mast on top of the building, and senior politicians have been expressing their condolences to the royal family and paying their tributes. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, has said Queen Elizabeth II was a steadfast and unshakable head of state. At the other end of the political spectrum, so to speak, the leader of the Irish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin here, Michelle O'Neill, has said she learned of the Queen's passing with deep regret. For about 30 of the Queen's 70 years on the throne, Northern Ireland was perhaps the most troubled part of her realm, and the conflict known as the Troubles touched the Queen most personally and painfully perhaps in 1979, when her cousin Lord Mountbatten was murdered by the IRA. Later, the Queen made some defining contributions to the peace process, most notably in 2011 when she became the first British monarch to carry out a state visit to the Republic of Ireland. A year later, there was another highly symbolic and powerful gesture when she shook hands with a former IRA commander, the late Martin McGuinness, who is a Sinn Féin politician, had become the joint head of the power-sharing devolved government. So I think it is those moments in particular that people in Northern Ireland will be reflecting on as they consider Her Majesty's legacy on this sad day over the coming days and, of course, for many decades to come.
Indeed. OK. Chris, thank you for that. Chris Page there, our Ireland correspondent outside Stormont, joining us there. This is the scene back at Buckingham Palace. And the place where, at around 6:40 this evening, that notice was posted by the palace announcing the death of Her Majesty the Queen, a few hundred miles further north in Scotland, of course, at Balmoral Castle. And more people, it seems, over the last, hour or so, have been turning up, umbrellas in hand, in the middle of all that rain, to pay tributes to, for many of them, the only monarch that they've ever known. And now, of course, we have a new king, and that is Charles III. He was, of course, the Prince of Wales, and the tributes there have come from the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, and we can bring in our correspondent, Howell Griffith, to talk to us now. Howell, just sum up, will you please, some of the thoughts of the leaders there where you are, and the thoughts of the people of Wales, not only on the passing of Her Majesty, but also, of course, the now Charles III.
Yes, Clive, well, I'm here at the Senedd, and we've seen people coming to lay flowers here too. The flags have been lowered. This is actually where the Queen made her final visit to Wales back in October last year. Opening the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, for the 6th time. She was a repeat visitor here. She opened what was then the first National Assembly back in 1999, lending, some people argue, a sense of legitimacy to this growing institution. The tributes to her, not surprisingly maybe, have been led by the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, who spoke about an hour or so ago.
It is with great sadness that we learn today
of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She has been the only monarch that most of us will remember, and today the country feels an immense loss. Throughout her long and exceptional life, as our longest reigning monarch, Her Majesty firmly upheld the values and traditions of the British monarchy. On behalf of the Welsh Government and people in all parts of Wales, I offer our deepest condolences to all Her Majesty's children and their families on this sad occasion.
Well, lots of people I've spoken to talking about how she oversaw a huge period of change in national life here in Wales, not just the new Senedd, but people saying she gave a sense of welcome to people of all nations and all faiths as she reigned for such a long time.
Howell, thank you for that. Howell Griffith there outside the Senedd in Cardiff. Well, as we know, the Queen was not only the monarch for the United Kingdom, but she was also the head of state across 14 other Commonwealth countries. So, how has the news been received right around the world? Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has been looking at the international response to the Queen's passing.
From the moment the Queen's reign began in Kenya in 1952, she played a constant and significant role on the international stage. And this afternoon there was sorrow and regret expressed around the world, including at the White House.
You know, our hearts and our thoughts go to the family members of the Queen, goes to the people of the United Kingdom. Our relationship with the people of the United Kingdom, and this is something that the President has said himself, has grown stronger and stronger.
The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth embodied the continuity and unity of the British nation for over 70 years. I keep the memory of a friend of France, a Queen of Hearts, who marked her country and her century forever. The Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, said Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth will be remembered as a stalwart of our times. She provided inspiring leadership to her nation and people. And the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, said it is with deep sadness that we learned of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. On behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire United Kingdom and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss.
As her 12th Canadian Prime Minister, I'm having trouble believing that my last sit-down with her was my last. I will so miss those chats. She was thoughtful, wise, curious, helpful, funny, and so much more.
She was dubbed by one of her biographers as Queen of the World, visiting hundreds of countries throughout her reign. She was monarch of 15 separate realms, the head of a Commonwealth of some 56 nations. So it was little surprise that news of the Queen's death made headlines around the world.
The Queen has passed away. The Queen died peacefully, the royal family says, at Balmoral this afternoon.
Throughout her reign, the Queen was a living embodiment of the transatlantic relationship, meeting no fewer than 12 US presidents. In a statement, President Biden described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. Barack Obama said she'd reigned with grace, elegance, and a tireless work ethic. She listened deeply, he said, thought strategically, and was responsible for considerable diplomatic achievements. Views echoed on the streets of Washington.
I admire her greatly. Yeah, I'm so sorry that she's passed. I mean, she's an icon here, everywhere.
Horrible. I've been reading about her my whole life. She's one of the sane people in the UK, like the US, and that's just sad.
As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen nurtured and shaped a unique international organisation, binding together 2.5 billion people. And it was to a meeting of Commonwealth leaders that the Queen made her last overseas tour in 2015, visiting Malta, an island she'd once called home. the bookend of a life of duty and diplomacy on the international stage. James Landell, BBC News.
The global significance of the passing of the Queen. Well, joining me now is the author and broadcaster Giles Brandreth, a personal friend of Prince Philip and someone who's known the Queen for 50 years. Giles, it's always a pleasure to see you, but on this sad day...
It is a sad day.
Yeah,
it's a significant day. The reason so many people are turning out Buckingham Palace is because people feel the loss. For most people, this is the only sovereign they have known. And it's extraordinary to think that on Tuesday of this week, this woman who was sustained by faith, but driven by duty, was again doing her duty, saying goodbye to her 14th Prime Minister, welcoming her 15th Prime Minister, doing what she's been doing. And thinking of her new Prime Minister, I think Liz Truss was born in 1975, and her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, the only Prime Minister she ever called Winston, she always called the others more formally, but Winston, I think, was born in something like 1876. So that gives you a feel of the span of her extraordinary life. But I think the reason that she is being mourned across the world, even by people who don't rate monarchy, don't think monarchy is important in the modern age, is because of her quality as a person. She was undoubtedly our longest reigning sovereign, probably our most popular, certainly our most respected. Why? Because she had qualities that made her unique. Some kings and queens we remembered for the dramatic things that happened during their reign. Not so much this queen. The type of person that she was, her dedication to service was so exemplary. Her courtesy, her kindness, her good humour, and they never wavered. She was the same person. I mean, I was lucky enough to meet her when I was still a teenager, but certainly she was the same person consistently throughout her life. What made her so special, I don't know. She would thank God. She would say that she had a blessed life, and her faith is what kept her going.
I think that's a really interesting and important point, that those personal qualities that she had, regardless of the crown on her head and the ermine and the fine jewels and so on, she was someone, you saw her in the line greeting people, you know, at some opening of some building or whatever. And there was a human, relatable touch that she had. And that quality seemed to imbue everything that she did and made her so accessible to millions of people. As I say, not just here, but in the Commonwealth as well.
She accepted her destiny. Yeah. She said at the coronation of her parents, which she attended, getting into the carriage, she wrote an account of it for her parents, that at first the carriage was quite jolty, but gradually we got used to it. And I think that's how she found being monarch. At first a bit jolty, but she got used to it. Yeah. And she wasn't self-conscious about being the Queen. She just accepted that. She was always herself. And I think the one aspect of her that maybe the public didn't see as much of as others who met her more privately was her sense of humour. Yeah. She was a very amusing person. It's one of the things that she and Prince Philip had in common. They made each other laugh. And she had a great sense of humour. And we got a bit of a flavour of it in recent years, that wonderful sketch with James Bond, and most recently, her brilliant acting with Paddington Bear. Oh, she loved. That's the sort of thing that? Yes. She loved doing. Yes. She was unique. She was extraordinary, and to be valued, to be cherished, to be remembered. You think about what makes magic. What is the magic of monarchy? What is the mystery of monarchy? Why is this phenomenon that mixes fairy tale and history? Why does it work? Why does it go on working? Well, during the last 70 years, it's that combination. The reason people made the series The Crown. Fairy tale and drama and heritage. But the Queen gave it her own personality, a unique personality, driven by duty, sustained by faith, kept happy by her passion for her dogs and her horses. That's what she loved most in life. But her naturalness as a person, her ability to put people at ease. because I think she was comfortable herself.
Comfortable in her own skin. and the Commonwealth. by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection the Queen was so widely held. And a sign